Okay. Oh, thank you. That's good. So, I think my job here, as I've said more, is to provide some, what I hope will be helpful context about that and the bigger picture, as I said, where we came from and where we're going. So, very briefly, just a bit of context on me that I think is relevant to this. Well, that's the circa 1985, when I was the CEO of Lotus Development Corporation. So this would make me roughly the age of some of you now. The reason I bring this up is that the PC was representing a big wave of disruptive innovation in the same way that the web is representing another wave of disruptive innovation. But because the early years of the PC are now long behind us, I think we can understand some things about patterns of innovation better if we look back. In other words, looking back can help us look forward. And I just mentioned a couple of things about the ancient history of that era. It's an interesting thing that you can see in the picture. I'm cradling a copy of Lotus 123, which was the dominant spreadsheet product of the 1980s. So if you were around then, you knew it intimately, and if you're of strictly the Facebook generation, you've never heard of it because Excel has been the dominant spreadsheet for probably 15 years now. So, but back in the day, as they say, just for those who may not know for a point of reference, Lotus was actually a pretty big company. Before we came out, the biggest spreadsheet was VisiCalc. We didn't actually invent it, and it had sold all of 300,000 copies. And when we shipped the product in 1983, we did $53 million in sales, and then in 1984, that number tripled to $150 million in sales. So it was the dominant product of its time, and it really experienced the kind of explosive growth that we're familiar with more recently with Netscape in the 90s and Google in the 2000s. It really unlocked something very, very important. And I want to talk a bit about what disruptive platforms unlock and why. But to understand that, I think it helps us actually go back a little bit further and connect up what we do in software with some broader traditions. I happened to read over the summer a book about the Wright brothers, and I had not given any thought to the Wright brothers probably since I was in elementary school, and of course we learned about the first header in their flight, Kitty Hawk. But this biography was actually a chapter of a great book by a guy named Harold Evans, in a book called They Made America, I think, which is all about innovators and innovations. Really helped me to understand the similarities and deep patterns of invention and innovation. So, for instance, the Wright brothers were not professional inventors. They were amateurs. They actually, Wilbur and Orville, what they did was they ran a bicycle shop. They made and sold and repaired bicycles somewhere in the Midwest. But they were obsessed as amateurs with the idea of heavier than air flight. And they were incredibly persistent and studied everything and built lots of prototypes. They were really hackers in the best sense of being obsessed with the problem for its own sake, and actually proceeded to evolve over a period of quite a few years. Better and better designs, first for gliders, actually, for unpowered flight, and then for powered flight. And on your left, that's Wilbur in his workshop. They built the entire plane by hand and rebuild it, sewing up the canvas wings and adjusting the motors. And on the right is actually a picture of the first flight. You know, when I read this, I felt a kind of connection, because out of this very, very modest beginning, the entire global aviation industry grew up just from these very talented amateurs who were following their passion. So this takes us to another very early platform, this being the Apple II. I think that the Apple II is the first modern digital platform. It's actually quite ancient now in technology terms. It's 30 years old. This is from 1978. But if you look at the mindset of Wozniak and Jobs, who did this, and it was really Steve Wozniak who was the designer of the Apple II. Jobs was the business guy. You know, they were a bit like the Wright brothers in that they were not professionals. They were very talented, passionate amateurs, and they actually didn't really get any traction when they took the idea for the personal computer to companies like HP. Wozniak worked at HP, and he had this idea to build a little PC, a classic device that didn't really exist then, and HP was not interested in it. So they went off and they built this really virtually on their own. And I mean, amusingly, the Apple II was as primitive in its way as the Wright Flyer was as an airplane. If you look at the specs of this, and this is a 1978 or so image, this is a machine that had a single 5¼ floppy disk drive. That's the item on the right, that held 143K bytes of data, a 9-inch black and white monitor, 64 kilobytes of RAM, and if you do the math, you find out that this machine is approximately 1 millionth the power size and capability of computers today, which is really quite amazing. That's Moore's law for you. But in a way, this is sort of the Wright Flyer of personal computers. You know, while incredibly underpowered by today's standards, and that's sort of an understatement, it still kind of embodied somehow the fundamental patterns such that what it was could become the basis of an entire global industry with enormous reach. And I like putting up pictures of the Apple II because it was the platform I got started on, and it had some characteristics that were important to me and actually made a difference. One was, rather like the web, it came with everything you needed to get started. When you booted it up, it came up with a prompt in BASIC, and you could just start hacking right away. So you could type in 10, print, quote, hello world, quote, and hit the enter key, and it would come back and print hello world, and you just written a hello world program, and you were up and running in the first few minutes. This easy ability to get started and do things, it turns out, is very, very, very important. And we'll come back to that. And you see that today in web development tools and the kind of things Dapper is doing. The easier it is to kind of get started and with modest effort, get something meaningful, is very empowering. So Apple II, even though obviously it didn't survive as a product line, was really the inspiration for the IBM PC. Guys at IBM really were big Apple II users, and they carefully copied the things that were good about the Apple II when they produced the IBM PC, and that permitted us at Lotus to do something which was to build a second-generation spreadsheet that really empowered users in a way in the business world that hadn't been done before. So this is actually a shot of the back of the box for Lotus 1.2.3 release 1A. And there's a lot of copy on there and a couple of screenshots that you can see a little bit of. Why was this a big deal, and what was this copy trying to say? Well, the first thing is that it let people do things that they could not do before, and that was a very big story. And it's a big story today when we develop something that mashes things up and permits people to do things that they couldn't do before. So among the most basic things that the spreadsheet permitted people to do is it allowed non-technical users of computers for the first time to use digital technology to do something for themselves rather than be dependent on a data processing department or an MIS department. And by putting tools in people's hands directly, this was a huge deal in terms of empowerment. And even more than that, one of the features that went into this product was a macro language, meaning that it not only recorded keystrokes that you typed in, but actually had some very simple programming constructs to handle loops and control and branching, so that, and a little bit of UI, so that people who were expert spreadsheet users could not only develop their own models, but could in fact wrap them in a program and hand them to other people who could then use them without knowing how they work. And this is sort of the first time user-generated, user-scripted or programming came into a personal computer platform. Of course, that led to lots of other things. And in a way, while the macros in 1, 2, 3 in no way directly influence the kind of user programming that's possible with HTML, it's a kind of a spiritual sort of ancestor, and amazingly empowering to give people a tool that they can not only use, but they can use to create tools that other people can use. And you get a multiplication of power. And so some of the deep design patterns, what we see in the web, we see echoes of in the PC era. When we come to the web, the point that I want to make here is that it was not in any sense inevitable or predestined that we would be where we are now. Sure, we had the PC, but in the as recently as a little more than 10, 15 years ago, there was no general consensus in society, say pre-browser, that the world was just waiting for the World Wide Web. In fact, if you ask the people who are supposed to be experts about the future of online communications, this is at the time before there was much in the way of online communications, they would have either said that what was going to happen would be things like AOL, Mobile Source and Congress bulletin boards, and forums that were controlled by private parties or kind of walled gardens that provided information utilities to people. But those were going to be what consumers were going to use. There was no notion that there might be tens or even hundreds of millions of websites up there. And the information utility vision was one, and the vision that was really there, which sort of found its full flowering in this idea of the information superhighway. That was the idea that if only the government would provide regulatory relief to our friends at the cable companies and phone companies to build fiber to the home, they would bring all the benefits of the information revolution to every household. Fortunately, that was mostly hype and advertising, and it was also fortunate that the U.S. Defense Department had been investing in networking through DARPA, Defense Research Projects Agency, for 20 years, so that there was an infrastructure based on TCP/IP that was open, very decentralized, really controlled by the people who used it with the intelligence at the edges. And in an incredibly far-sighted policy move, people in the government decided to repurpose this not as something for the military research institutions, but something for the general public. And that was the internet, which then permitted various services, FTP, Gopher, Waze, and then the web to be built on top of it. So it's really a series of happy accidents in a way that got us to the starting gate. But importantly, what enabled the web to work and to take off was that it was simple and open and extensible. Properties that other online platforms didn't have. Simple to get started with HTML. It's actually quite simple. Open in the sense that anybody could put up a web server, and extensible in the sense that you could add value by inventing new things, and as long as you followed the protocols, you could play. You didn't require permission. And those qualities are very similar to the qualities that made the PC work and grow explosively. So I tried to identify what I'll call ecosystem accelerators. These are the sort of commonalities of what makes new platforms really go and take off. Because I think it's important to understand and take advantage of these factors. So whether it's the PC or the web, platforms that empower a broad base of both users and developers are ones that tend to grow rapidly. They have low barriers to entry. Anybody can play, or almost anybody. It doesn't require permission to sign up or signing an NDA or getting some big entity that controls some set of information resources to give you permission to do something. Low barriers to entry are good. Things that are easy to learn are good, where you can get useful results with minimal effort. And in fact, early websites were very, very easy to put up because it was easy to just write a little bit of HTML. And when you begin to get some results with that minimal effort, that is very encouraging to people to get started. Another accelerator is something that's easy to use. So another way of putting it is it has a high reward to effort ratio. Again, that has the effect of bringing people into the tent who have been outsiders, but have a place to get started and then can proceed. So from very modest beginnings, big platforms emerged. Early PCs like the Apple II were very modest devices that could barely do anything at all by conventional standards of the mini computers and mainframes of the era did absolutely nothing useful. And similarly, the early first generation websites were very modest affairs and really were not capable of doing the sorts of things that they do today, for instance, and only a few visionaries like Jeff Bezos and others really saw that you could get from here to there. But the power of Moore's law, dramatically increasing underlying capabilities, plus these sort of self-reinforcing dynamics with ecosystem accelerators, can create enormous platforms. So today, where are we? I just want to talk a little bit about Dapper. And I should explain, I am an angel investor. I have some financial interest here, but more broadly, I'm excited. This is really the reason that I'm here, about what can happen when you develop more tools and more infrastructure to open up the web, even further. And that's why I see Dapper and other things fitting in this category of mashup, middleware. In a way, it's kind of the next step. I mean, sampling has been very big in music now for a generation. When you're in a digital world, the idea of you start with a big thing, but you begin to take it apart, you take a piece from here and a piece from there, and put it together and combine it in a new kind of way and get something new. That's been a standard method for being creative in music for a long time, and it's coming back into the digital world, this sort of idea of a remix culture, that things aren't frozen in place, and things are meant to be taken apart and put back together again. That's hacking in the best sense. That is sort of meeting the world of web development in a big kind of way, and I think that's the way that part of the underlying interest why people are here, the excitement and fascination what can we do now? What can we build that we couldn't do before? How can we take advantage of everything that is out there? How does this empower people that own content and have websites? How do you sort of mix and match so that you can take what you have and find new ways to package it, to distribute it, to build traffic? And if you're a developer, how can you easily create new kinds of services and new value that are based on existing content and services? It's a very exciting area where there are lots of experiments. I imagine that many of you in the room are actually the progenitors of this, or the people that are actually realizing this kind of vision. And I just want to say, I think it's in the same tradition as the what we've seen with pattern generation with the PC and with the original web. So, having set the stage, I want to try to identify what I think are a few of the big issues, like things to think about, larger questions of policy and of value that inform this whole arena. And to do that, we need to zigzag again in time and go back in time a little bit. Right, okay. So, optics of the link. This web stuff, as you know, didn't come out of nowhere. It came out of somewhere. And we'll just forgive the very brief kind of history lesson here for those of you who know this. I know from having done similar talks many times that you always help to provide a little bit of historical context. The guy on the left is named Vannevar Bush. He was Franklin Delano Roosevelt's science advisor in World War II. But in this context, what he's known for is having written an article for the Atlantic magazine in 1945 called As We May Think. Could I just see hands on that? How many people actually know about that and have read that article? Pretty less than hands. Here was the great thing about that article. He envisioned a device called the MEMX, M-E-M-E-X, that was not yet built. In fact, was never to be built. But the idea of the MEMX was that it would be a device that would keep track of pieces of information and the connections between them in an extremely comprehensive kind of way. And it was a kind of a re-envisioning of the library in a device that would fit into a desk and allow the user to record notes and create associations and trails between the items containing the information. It's a very powerful idea at the dawn of the era of digital computing. In the first modern digital computer was the ENIAC in 1945, same time frame. The great thing about Bush and the MEMX was that he was really right about the essentials of what eventually became the web, the way of globally interrelating little pieces of information through links. And he was profoundly wrong on every single detail. So he envisioned that the storage medium might be a microfilm for this. And on and on and on. And I don't believe it detracts in any way from the value or the achievement of Bush's vision that he was wrong about all the details about how it was going to be done, because he actually inspired a chain of thinkers and inventors and writers in direct descent that got us to where we are today. And I just want to call out attention to one other person in this chain who's very important. Certainly not the only one. Those people who are familiar with history will go, why do you have Ted Nelson and not Doug Engelbart? That's just because I'm doing a short talk and I get to pick and choose a little bit. But Ted Nelson, who's on the right there, who's now 7 years old, actually invented the term hypertext in 1963, which is a long time ago, and was the proponent of something called Project Xanadu. Again, another project that was written about but never successfully realized, but whose influence is incredibly broad, even among people who had never heard of it. Xanadu had many forms over the years, but part of Ted Nelson's vision was that all of the literature of the entire world would be interconnected in a gigantic network, and in a way that it could all be linked together with these two-way kinds of links. And he was speaking at a time and writing when you couldn't do this, and everybody genuinely thought he was a complete lunatic. I remember when Apple came out with HyperCard, which was really the first piece of software that took linking seriously, even though it was a desktop software, not network-based. Ted said HyperCard was great because he was instantly promoted from lunatic to visionary, which is the way it goes with these things. But the influence, the vision of what Nelson wrote about was actually the closest thing to the web before there was the web. But we had to give technology time to catch up with the vision. We had to give Moore's Law time to work, to make fast computers with more memory, and to make networking practical and broadband and so on. So it started with these two guys, but it took Tim Berners-Lee, who was the father of the web, to actually do something practical about it around 1990. And if I had a longer talk over a lecture series, I'd put up Mark Andreessen and we talk about the history of the web. But Tim gets credit for doing something very, very, very practical, which is defining very simple protocols for sharing and linking information and getting the first servers and clients written to actually show that was worthwhile. There's a great book called Small Pieces Loosely Joined by a guy named David Weinberger that